George Lucas gave Jon Favreau solid advice for The Mandalorian. Well, I mean, George Lucas is the maker. He's the man. He's the creator, the allfather of Star Wars. And if anyone is going to give somebody sound advice on how to actually make Star Wars and make it great, you would have to think it's got to be George Lucas. One wonders why Disney didn't have him handcuffed to Rian Johnson during The Last Jedi. But I mean, be that as it may, it's nice to see that he's on set with Jon Favreau, imparting tidbits of wisdom as this man embarks on his own entry into the Star Wars saga with his upcoming show, The Mandalorian. So of all the things that George could say to him, I mean, he's got decades and decades worth of experience, and he's obviously created the Star Wars franchise. You would have to think first and foremost, the first thing out of his mouth as he sits down with Favreau to discuss what he should look to do as he begins creating his entry into the Star Wars saga, I would hope the first things out of George's mouth are, John, don't fuck this up. How's it going, everybody? This is Phil. So for anybody who's spent a little bit of time here with me on my channel, you know that I'm a big proponent, big fan of the idea of the upcoming show, The Mandalorian. So you could call me a Fandalorian, I guess. That is actually a term that one of my subscribers here, a buddy of mine, System Error, actually made a comment in one of my videos. So let's stick with that, huh? All of us here are looking forward to this show. We are Fandalorians. So as such, I'm always happy to hear information about this show that's coming out. I'm excited about Jon Favreau being at the helm of this show. I'm excited for Dave Filoni being a part of it, and it looks to be a show that's really trying to pay attention to what came before it. It's set several years after Return of the Jedi, so it's in a time period that we haven't really explored on film, but it's still familiar because it's just after the original trilogy saga, so it's going to be very familiar in a lot of regards and a lot of aspects, and that's something that really speaks to me as a longtime fan who I've seen the sequel. Look, we've seen the sequel trilogy and we've seen the prequel trilogy, and the Clone Wars is fantastic, but the original trilogy is still, that's where it's at as far as I'm concerned. So I'd like to see stories that are told in that period of time, and Rogue One, a lot of people consider that to be the best of the bunch as far as all of the Disney Star Wars movies are concerned, and that was right before A New Hope. So it's right there in that original trilogy era for those movies. Now, of course, Solo, a Star Wars story, that's also in that original trilogy time era. I mean, it does come, I think, probably maybe like a decade before that, but it's kind of right there. And all right, well, look, they all can't be winners, and even then, if you look at certain elements of Solo, a Star Wars story, it is kind of neat to see some of the things there that do feel like they could be a part of the aesthetic of the original trilogy. So anyway, let's get moving on with this story here. This is over on Cinema Blend. The author is Jessica Rawdon. So let's take a look and see what they're doing here. It says Jon Favreau may be riding high on his box office win for The Lion King, but he has another high-profile project in The Mandalorian coming, and soon. He didn't just jump into the Star Wars universe without some help, however. Instead, he talked to Star Wars expert and creator George Lucas as the project was coming along. In fact, while promoting the Disney theatrical release, Jon Favreau talked a little bit about Disney Plus's The Mandalorian, revealing at the time one piece of advice the director gave him about creating a project in the Star Wars universe. The advice he got was pretty solid, and the showrunner kept it in mind while working on the new show. So he said, we had a long talk with each other, and one thing he said to me was, "Remember, John,
the Force will be with you, always."
No, he didn't say that. He said, remember, John, the real audience for all stories and all myths is the kids that are coming of age, because he's really Joseph Campbell adherent. Now, for those of you who don't know Joseph Campbell, he is an author, and he wrote The Hero with a Thousand Faces, and George Lucas credits that book as an influence on him in creating the original Star Wars films. So in that book, Campbell, he goes on and he discusses and explores theories of mythological narratives, and pretty much puts forth the idea of the hero's journey, which is a big influence on a lot of modern movies. And we could see it with Luke Skywalker, we could see it with Neo in The Matrix. It's a standard blueprint to follow if you're going to create a story where you introduce a hero and follow his journey going forward as he acquires the necessary skills to overcome what may seem like insurmountable odds and eventually emerge victorious. Now, my take on that advice is that children who are coming of age, there's an innocence there, and as they embark on their own personal journeys and what life is going to bring them, they're faced with many forks in the road and decisions that they need to make. And listen, it'll take you down either the light or the dark path. And I think something like a Star Wars movie, like the original A New Hope, puts a strong emphasis on the hero overcoming insurmountable odds and even facing adversity, manages to push forward and end up being victorious. These are the types of things where if you instill in a young child or a child coming of age, that's something that they carry with them all through life. I know I saw Star Wars as a young child, 4 years old, 5 years old, and a lot of those things I can say are instilled in me. The desire to do right, to stand by my friends, to make the right decisions, to not give up on people, to be loyal, to be faithful. These are things that are instilled in me, and a lot of them can be found in the themes of Star Wars. Of course, I've also had people, I was fortunate enough to grow up with adults, good people in my life, my parents and my grandparents and aunts and uncles who were good people and taught me right from wrong. But you also take something else from these grand adventures that are, they ignite your imagination and they allow you to escape what's going on around you in a real world and transport yourself into another universe, and you get to see it played out on a grander scale, and that makes a huge impression. This visual medium of film, when we go on these adventures and these stories, they leave impressions and they leave marks on us as children, and that stays with you. It's one thing for your parents to tell you something, to do something a certain way, but when you're able to see something played out and there's subtext there. Okay, there's allegorical subtext. There's the type of storytelling that insinuates something, but for a young mind, you might not get where the themes are coming from if they're based off of some type of real world issue or politics or anything of that nature. For a young mind, you're just taking the story at face value, and you're able to understand the difference between right and wrong and good and evil, and how one decision can affect another. And that's the importance, I think, that something like Star Wars can impart on a young mind. Of course, adults, we love this stuff too, right? We buy all of the toys. We buy, the collectibles. We buy the relentless re-releases, Blu-rays and DVDs and VHS when that was a thing. So there is a huge audience there for adults. There's a huge audience there for children as well. But the advice that George gave John is sound advice, because these, especially modern day Star Wars, has found itself mired in too much political nonsense or people trying to get their ideology across or stick it in there. We know that it's not anything that's surreptitious anymore. I mean, people have come out and said recently that we need to hijack these franchises and put our message in there, our social justice message. And, you know, Star Wars, at least the original trilogy, is fantastic in that it doesn't necessarily push anything like that whatsoever. All it's trying to do is tell a great fairy tale story with a happy ending, right? It's a story of family. It's a story of redemption. It's the hero's journey. It's just a classic tale. And as a storyteller, these should be the things that you are preoccupied with first and foremost, is telling a great story that hits all the right notes, because you fail the audience when you try to do something else other than that, and you've compromised your integrity as an artist to tell a story. So let's continue on with this article, shall we? I've said enough. Jon Favreau is by no means the only person associated with Star Wars who has taken a meeting with George Lucas in the past. J.J. Abrams has already admitted he consulted with George Lucas for Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker. Unfortunately, he didn't consult with him for Star Wars The Force Awakens, and Kathleen Kennedy threw his script right out the window the moment she walked out of the boardroom and Lucas signed the papers. Although he was a bit cagey about what he took out of the meeting, Lucas also explained a Han Solo reaction and made it into Solo, a Star Wars story. According to Ron Howard, who even noted the A New Hope director got into the character of Han Solo while explaining how he felt the character would behave. Now, for those of you who might not know what this is actually about here, who might not have actually even seen the movie Solo, a Star Wars story, and I don't blame you if you took the knee on that one. What this actually is going into is there is a scene on the ship of the Millennium Falcon. So now on that ship, it actually belongs to Lando Calrissian, and he has a room, a closet, a walk-in closet, which is essentially looks like it's dedicated to pretty much all of his capes that he wears. And in this scene, Kira, who is the love interest of Solo, is she's in there and she's standing in front of a mirror and she's trying on a few of these capes, and she's kind of looking and seeing how they look on her. And Han Solo walks in there. So now in the original script, Han Solo was supposed to walk in, and he has a dialogue with Kira before they have a romantic moment, and he takes one of the capes that she has and he hangs it up on the rack. And essentially that was the day that George Lucas happened to be on set, and he essentially intimated that the character of Han Solo would actually not hang the cape. He would just kind of take it and toss it to the side. And it's just a little character beat, but you could imagine the difference that makes as far as the character is concerned. And you can imagine Han Solo, he is that kind of smug, arrogant scoundrel that when he's having a moment, his bravado, his cockiness, his arrogance, he's going to take the cape because it's something that it's getting in the way of, it's becoming a distraction. He's trying to have a conversation here, so he's going to take the cape and he's going to put it to the side, and that's going to make a little bit of a statement. And that's a character beat that people don't tend to necessarily know or pick up on in this new generation of Disney Star Wars. And that's the value of a George Lucas being on set. Now, of course, if I was Ron Howard, and it did make it to the movie, and if I was Ron Howard, if you look at the scene, Alden Ehrenreich, he kind of throws it down with a little bit of force, and it seems like more is a kind of an aggressive act. I think a Han Solo would take it and almost make like he was going to hang it up and then just drop it instead of actually throw it a little bit more violently in the way that Alden did. But still, it's all about the character beat. So and that's, when George is giving you advice, you take it, because he's got an intuitive depth of knowledge, having spent so much time with these characters for decades, creating them in his head, putting them down on paper, and then casting for them, knowing what they would be like, sitting there in the casting room and casting Harrison Ford, and then directing these characters on film in the greatest Star Wars trilogy that we've yet to see. So, when George comes in and he says, hey, look, especially for somebody like Jon Favreau, who's looking to do Star Wars right in the time of the original trilogy, where George Lucas really can stake his claim to this whole entire saga, you take that advice. You take that advice from George Lucas, because he knows exactly what he's talking about, and he's going to give you information that you didn't even realize you needed to know. That's the importance of having him there. So basically, George Lucas is a font of information. No kidding. So it's no real surprise Jon Favreau took the opportunity to talk with the Star Wars creator, who famously sold his brand and his soul infamously to Disney about 7 years ago. I can't believe it's been that long. Plus, I'm sure just talking to George Lucas was a cool opportunity for Favreau, who is a noted Star Wars fan. And again, that's one of the great things about Jon Favreau being in charge of The Mandalorian, is that he is a fan. He grew up as a fan as a child, and you gotta imagine that from everything I've seen him say, he wants to do the child inside of him. He wants to do right by that child and all of the fans that feel the way that he feels growing up with this movie being a part of his life. He wants to recreate that experience. So that's a great thing, having him in charge of this series. While Jon Favreau is often known for his directing and acting in the world of The Mandalorian, he's actually signed on to write and produce the project, and will be the showrunner on the new series. Fantastic. Earlier this year at Star Wars Celebration, Favreau said he spent much of the holidays one year working on The Mandalorian, and even Dave Filoni was teasing him about getting a life. He also talked at Celebration about deciding to hire directors who already cared about the Star Wars universe to make sure they were the right fit. So here's a guy, he works through his holidays on this show, and gets teased by Dave Filoni, who's a huge Star Wars nerd who worked with George Lucas. Even he's giving him shit. Tells him to get a life. And then he wanted to make sure that they were hiring directors who cared about the Star Wars universe, so that they were the right fit. So it's clear he's taking his myriad duties on his project seriously. You know what? And that's all I can ask. And I want to see it succeed. Immensely. If it fails, obviously I'm going to be disappointed. I'll say, what the hell are they thinking? And that'll be another bunch of videos. But man, I everything that I've done as far as The Mandalorian is concerned on my channel has been filled with just hope and positivity. And I still continue to have that, and to hold on to that, and seeing things like this, they just fill me with even more hope. So we've even reached the point where Jon Favreau has also admitted he's already writing season 2. It's fantastic. If you need further evidence regarding how much he seems to care, still of his conversation with George Lucas, Jon Favreau also revealed in his interview with GQ that he feels storytelling generally accomplishes, when done correctly, expanding a little on what George Lucas told him. So he said, we enjoy the stories as adults, but really, storytelling is about imparting the wisdom of the previous generations to the children who are becoming adults, and giving them a context for how to behave and how to learn the lessons of the past without making the mistakes on their own. That's the hope, that you can teach them how to avoid all the hardship, but garner all the wisdom. And you know what? It's really nice. And I think Star Wars, its core values should be based on that and nothing else. Now we all know that Star Wars it's a machine that turns out action figures and merchandise and promotional tie-ins and theme park attractions and everything of that nature. But if you're a storyteller, your mission statement first and foremost should be this, because everything else good can only come from it. These types of decisions and this type of mindset going into creating a Star Wars story, there's a purity to it, and there's value to that. And that's the value that launched this franchise, that allowed George Lucas to sell it for over $4 billion years down the road. That's how much value was put on that original trilogy. That is the epicenter. That is ground zero for all of this. So if the guy who created that, who had that mind state going into it and gave us what we originally got, which the thing that we cherish most for all of these years, if he's given that advice to Jon Favreau personally, and you know he's given this advice also to Dave Filoni, then I'm really, really feeling good about the potential of The Mandalorian. I think as Star Wars fans, we might be in store for something special. I think Disney Star Wars has become something that's more pick and choose, as opposed to every time out you have to see it. I think you have to weigh it out now and say, you know what, this is worth my time. This seems like a bunch of garbage. But from what it looks like, and from everything we've read so far up to this point, The Mandalorian seems to be one of the projects that's hopefully going to escape having any kind of real major issues. It just wants to tell a good story, and I think that's all we really want as fans at the end of the day. So The Mandalorian is in a unique position because it hits a fan base both young and old, and will hit a wider swath of audiences than most programs, making this point of view and advice particularly interesting. Given Season 2 is already being developed, it will hopefully be a success when it hits Disney+. For now, you can see what is all headed to the upcoming streaming service with our full guide. I don't really care about that. So that's pretty much it, guys. So look, again, I'm excited. I'm a Fandalorian of this project. I'm happy that Jon Favreau is on it. I'm happy that George Lucas is on set giving this type of advice, because I know sometimes people get annoyed when he says Star Wars is for children, and that's the argument that people fall back on when adults get frustrated when it's a subpar product. But I think in a certain regard, the idea that you can approach it where it's a story for children who are coming of age, it reaches a certain level of purity, and I think that helps create a good story that doesn't come from any kind of a weird place with any kind of a funky kind of agenda. It's just trying to tell a good story based in classic storytelling tropes of the hero's journey and acts of valor and adventure and redemption, these types of things that we applaud and are timeless elements of traditional storytelling. Nothing that is mired in today's politics or social agendas. All we really want is to go to the movie and escape. And at its heart, Star Wars is the best and can be the best of escapism storytelling. So anyway, guys, let me know what you think about good old George giving Jon this type of advice. Are you looking forward to The Mandalorian? As you know, I am definitely looking forward to this. I'm excited for this. I probably will not subscribe to Disney+, but I'll find a way to see it. Anyway, let me know what you guys think about this article. I'll talk to you sometime soon. As always, be happy, be safe, be healthy. Have a great night, guys. Bye-bye.